Thank you, Chair. I think very enriching session so far. Thanks to all my co-panelists and to Yashas for such a brave initiative and bringing veterans, bringing people from all walks of life and all those people who are involved in Indic research. My presentation is much more academic in nature because that's our job. And those of them who are practitioners have given their peace of mind, which is of great help to those of us who work on these fronts. But nevertheless, I'll try making my submission to the very given topic to me. That's the challenges to India's Indo-Pacific strategy, which I've titled as India and Indo-Pacific interest strategy and the challenge itself. Now, this is the format of the presentation. Just going into, because we study and we are students of geopolitics, we click on to very important individuals like Mahan, Mackinder, Karl Hochschild and all those people. So I probably may begin with a geopolitician and then probably end also with a scholar on geopolitics. Now, Mahan says that the organization and concentration of force is a factor in the maintenance of justice, order, and peace. It is the highest expression of that element in civilization force that was created and now upholds society, giving efficacy to the pronouncements of law, whether by the legislatures or in the courts. Organized force alone, he says, enables the quiet and the weak to go about their business and to sleep securely in their beds, safe from the violent without or within. So at the end, the last three lines are very important. He says that the organized force alone enables the quiet and the weak to go about their business. So Indo-Pacific is all about this for me. And if anybody wants to make their say or have their footprint, I think Mahan is the guide that we can see here. Now, simple introduction to it, how the whole idea of Indo-Pacific has come in. We started off with nothing, and then the oceans were divided, and then we started giving names. And at the same time, certain geographies have become very important. Do we call that as revenge of geography? We need to see it. At the end of the Cold War, when the onset of globalization, the way it took off, though it came in the 70s, most of the people thought that the world is going to be a complete different one, where they thought geography will be irrelevant. We will have a world that's going to be absolutely open, and neoliberalism or business alone would take the countries forward. Everybody would be concerned only about wealth, and that creation of wealth in proportionately leading to the national interests of each country. But fortunately or unfortunately, we can see the revenge of geography. Again, it is trying to show its position, that how important it is, and in one or the other way, we've been recreating them. These are in the minds of the people, which we will see whether we call it as revenge of geography, relevance or resurgence of geography, or relevance to geography. It's all left to us. With that enlightened liberal order that we are trying to look at, geographical rivalries are among the great powers is going to be the fact of the day. That's precisely why we, in the 21st century, in 2021, when we are going through so many other issues, including that of a pandemic, yet we are talking about a particular region and the geopolitical rivalry precisely because of this particular problem. Now, understanding the Indo-Pacific is not some sort of a new creation. We see this one because it's sort of a rediscovery. I said that I'll be using quite a few geopolitical theorists. Karl Hochschild once called it by this particular name, Indo-Pacifician ROM, where indirectly what he said is Indo-Pacific region or the space in his geopolitical ruminations in the 1920s and the 30s. In fact, he goes on saying that the geographic impact of the dense Indo-Pacific concentration of humanity and cultural empire of India and China, which are geographically sheltered behind the protective veil of the offshore island arcs of the Western Pacific and the Bay of Bengal, offshore island arcs through which they are now both actively and competitively deploying. This is something that he has already spoken about. So what we are doing is rediscovery. If somebody is fooling themselves that they have created a new terminology or it's all going to be new, I think we just are repeating the history that was spoken about. Now, these maritime waters are what another geopolitical strategist, Nicholas Spikeman, considered in 1944 as the circumferential maritime highway, which links the whole area together in terms of sea path. See, this is something that the scholars of geopolitics have done invariably to show that this will come back to us. That's precisely why I use the terminology revenge of geography. Now, why states and diplomats indulge in creating these new spheres? This is something that we also have to look at. Rory Metcalf, many of you must have read his works, have been extremely influential. Says that the mental maps of regions and the that leaders and the diplomats use have material effects. Again, going back to looking at how resources become very, very important. Now, these maps help define where nations prioritize their diplomatic attentions, the power projection capabilities they develop for their militaries, the strategic problems they must attend to or can afford to ignore, the partners and rivals they identify, and the regional organizations they prefer, including the lists of who's in and who's out. I think these are the ways the regions have been created. For the regions to run, you have certain organizations being created, certain groupings being created. That includes Quad, what we say, AUKUS. You have so many different groups that have been created, and those who have power, those who have capability will stay, and those of them who cannot, and those of them who don't have these great power ambitions will absolutely stay out, is the submission here. Now, how do we deconstruct the Indo-Pacific construct itself? What is the premise? I used the premise, the trigger, and what stops the war. There is no possibility of a war at this juncture, which probably at some point of time in the 2018 and 19s, including Graham Allison, who spoke about the Thucydides trap, almost spoke about that there is something that's coming in, anticipate, there's going to be a war, but it's not going to be, is my take here. What is the premise? The uneasiness of the existing superpower to accommodate a newer power challenging its status has been observed in international politics, which is normal, except for the Second World War, where the then superpower and contesting superpower both cooperated because of a common enemy, which also in geopolitics and war and strategy we call as the center of gravity, that was Mr. Hitler. Apart from that one, there was no possibility. Otherwise, if you look at time immemorial, every time when a superpower was upset or when the superpower was replaced, and that had happened through friction, that has also led to wars and many other things. What are the triggers then in that case? The comprehensive national power of China and the US uneasiness are equally going together, because China wants to call its rise as peaceful rise, which we remember, and the Chinese dream. Again, it's a very, very elusive terminology that's been used by several leaders. There are two terminologies that the Chinese use.
Professor Nanda Kishor, if I can just interrupt, your slides are not moving ahead.
You're unable to see the slide?
Only now we can.
It's now appearing?
Yeah, now they've started appearing.
Okay, fine. When I think,
but they were not moving ahead, so you would need to sort of press on them.
Is it fine now?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so these two terminologies, use of force and harmony, have their own distinct features in the Chinese construct itself. Because we look at the Ming Emperor, he also sent across his Admiral Zheng, where he mentioned this harmony as a terminology, but over a period of time, we have seen how this has been interpreted in different ways. Now, what stops the war? Advent of nuclear weapons, no doubt about it. The complex interdependence that we speak in international relations, where economic relations have bound a lot of these nations, irrespective of the type of uneasiness that they go through, and then hurt the adversary economically. Now, that's the only way you can do, not any other possibilities at this juncture. That also has to be respected. Hope you're able to see the next slide.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So there are certain Chinese slogans. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but these are very, very important ones today. If Indo-Pacific is a problematic scenario where there are a lot of challenges that all of us are going through, or the countries are going through, from a superpower to emerging powers to great powers, it's all because of these typical statements. Now, theory of the three represents advanced productive forces, advanced culture and interests of the broad masses, and finally the relative prosperous society is what Jiang Zemin said. So they have already given them what they have to achieve. Harmonious society and the scientific concept of development, this was spoken by Hu Jintao. Then moderately prosperous society by 21, global technology leader by 35, strong democratic civilized harmonious, though all sound rhetoric. This was by Xi Jinping. He is given a target of 2049. Now, all this is culminating in what we see as the Belt and Road Initiative. That's a philosophical foundation in which they are not ready to agree what India is doing in the Indo-Pacific itself. Now, India's interests are very, very clear. We all started off with the confluence of the two seas speech by Shinzo Abe in Indian Parliament in 2007. Perhaps that's when India started talking about it. India created the Indo-Pacific division within the MEI, and we also have the Indian Ocean Rim Association, ASEAN, and the Quad, several other ones, trying to integrate all the words. Now, border dispute with China, in fact, has triggered a lot of other things. Why Indian strategic communities actually become very, very vocal, and it says now openly you are seeing, including my own guru, Professor M.D. Nalapat, who spoke about China as an aggressor. He's speaking China as a rival for India, is all because of this particular component where unapologetically they have been then trying to do something or the other to upset India and see to it that India is restricted to its own region, not even the region, even they're trying to cover us, they're trying to trouble us in our own region, forget going up till the Indo-Pacific. But what is the change that has come in? What is the strategy that has come in? There is an unapologetic realist that has come into India's foreign policy itself. Perhaps an unavoidable one, no doubt about it, because India debates on balancing and alliance formation, they are undergoing a lot of changes. Though India is allergic to the word alliance, I think that's all coming in these days. Now, India needs to manage that. When we look at the type of challenges and the issues that are existing, it needs to manage itself in a conflict between an advancing power, that is China, and an already advanced power or a dominating power. This is what we call as the disruption of the status quo that's happening. And India is in between, because the United States want to see India as a linchpin, and it wants India to join in and come out of this reluctant power approach that we are able to see, where it's not ready to call out India as an enemy, China as an enemy, and then trying to take part and move the Quad. It's much more protective, and somehow we see India going comparatively or trying to take a softer approach. The maritime initiatives I already mentioned about, the BIMSTEC, IORA, and all those things need to be strengthened. Somehow institutional strength is much, much better than individual capacity to deal with a particular nation. This is seen even with the superpower. United States is unable to do anything with regard to China. Now, what are the probabilities and the opportunities? Now, heightened neoliberal approach is the need of the hour. As security-related issues will put India in the backbench. India certainly cannot compete at this juncture. That's why I said institutional strengthening is important. There are a lot of them who have complex interdependence with China. And if India has to succeed in the Indo-Pacific, it needs to somehow put the neoliberal approach. It needs to economically interact with and integrate the region to make sure that there is a primacy of the Indian Ocean, and that Indian Ocean is only being extended through the Indo-Pacific. Now, we have also arrived at a situation, whether you want to choose globalization or not, globalization has chosen you already without your own consent. Now, that's a scenario, and we need to get into that pragmatic approach. That's a possibility. Now, use of IR theory, just for the sake of young audience, there are also a lot of students who are looking up to. These are classic, very, very important theories. If you look at neorealism as well as neorealism as well as realism, who talk about anarchy, pursuing the national interest is not is immoral. They say this is beyond all those things. There is also some amount of relative gain for US and Japan, whereas absolute gain is for India and Australia, but they need to make that. This is what the theoretical approach anticipates India to take forward. But there is going to be an idea of the collective security alliance. Where is it leading to? That's a question that we need to look at. Is there a balance of power or a balance of threat? That clarity has to come to some of these nations. Now, US and Japan have military ambitions, whereas India and Australia have commercial ambitions. That's why Quad is still in a desire. It's in a bad condition. It's unable to make any progress whatsoever. Then you have the neoliberal institutionalism, which also believes in anarchy, state as rational actors, and it wants to think national interest is in terms of it's in terms of the wealth that the states have to create, standard of living, all those things. It's important. Cooperation is not harmony. This is what they say. Cooperation is not equivalent or synonym to harmony. Cooperation is possible when there is a conflict alone. Only so they anticipate that can be taken care of. Now, harmony is the absence of all conflict, which is absolutely impossible. They are much more pragmatic in this approach. Their problem, or when we interpret through this particular theoretical framework, there are no institutions. That's another difficulty here. No plan drawn so far, and trade and commerce as a focus is yet to come into this region. It's still seen as some sort of a security construct. There is a problem with regard to that. Only perhaps the social constructivists have a different type of an understanding, because they argue that states can have multiple identities that are socially constructed through interaction with other actors. The practicing democracies is what they say. Security diamond is Japan. Then Australia feels itself as non-entrepreneur, that it can be there in all possible ways, because Australia was reluctant till recently to speak against China. Now slowly it's opening up. What are the parameters that we are trying to look at? Quality of democracy. over a period of time in all these nations, invariably people are talking that quality of democracy is not actually going the way we are anticipating. Do we expect ASEAN to pitch in all those things as an idea to do something? I don't think they are so formidable that they can take on China just like that. There is also democratic deficit in those people, with those people whom we are trying to partner. They want to establish democracy by trying to bring something else. That's a problem. Now, between 2000 to 2015, this is an interesting study that says democracy broke down inside 27 countries. This is from Larry Diamond's work. But Quad thinks that democracy is what has brought us together. I don't know, will that ever be an answer in the Indo-Pacific as a challenge? Now, what is the limitation of the strategy? There is a leadership crisis. Each one of them are towering leaders, but as such, what the word leadership means is still in crisis. There is an institutional crisis where as institutions are unable to pitch into it and then stand formidably against China and then make use of the best possible components of Indo-Pacific itself. There is an action plan issue. There is an action plan deficit crisis, which we have to recognize. I think being pragmatic, we need to recognize that particular component as well, which is also very, very crucial for us to understand. If these three are taken care, I think these limitations can be taken care of. Now, what I'm anticipating at the end is some sort of preparedness that is always required through partnerships and then promotion of a networked region. Without that, individually, I think all these countries are heroes, but collectively they have a lot of problems. Individually also, if they're heroes, they can show what is their strength and power, but they're unable to deliver anything. For these three things to happen, there is an amount of consistency that is required in the approach that the countries are following, that includes India. I'm specifically referring to Quad and other things. Cooperation, constant cooperation is required. And then they need to create conducive opportunities for all of them to feel they are important, all of them to take up responsibility. I mentioned in the beginning itself, as I promised, I start with the geopolitical theorist and also would end. Kishor had actually anticipated what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. He said, if an empire could arise with Japan's soul in China's body, that would be a power which would put even the empire of Russia and the United States in the shade. This is what Kishor had said. I think that is exactly what has happened. I think including India, United States, and all like-minded powers have to deal with this reality in the Indo-Pacific.